Welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at something highly unusual for you today.
Yeah, highly unusual is probably an understatement.
Right. Usually you and I are, sifting through a 400-page biography or some dense sociological study.
Or a massive investigative series.
Exactly. We're usually taking massive amounts of information and trying to find the core narrative for you. But today, we're reversing that process entirely. We have a microscopic fragment of text. I mean, it is barely a paragraph long.
It's tiny.
Yeah, transmitted from a source identifying itself only as Radio-Mannadoro. But the density of this single paragraph it's just staggering.
It's incredibly dense.
Right. It reads like this chaotic, enraged pirate radio broadcast. But beneath that surface aggression, it's actually an incredibly intricate piece of literary and geopolitical architecture.
That's a great way to put it.
It weaves together 1960s psychedelic rock history, ancient Hindu eschatology, anti-colonial fury, and even science fiction dread.
It really is a fascinating artifact of modern media construction because, when you first encounter the text, it presents as this wall of raw, almost unfiltered hostility.
Yeah, it hits you hard.
It does. But as we parse the language, we find a highly deliberate, meticulously coded structure.
Right.
The author is using this short transmission to present a unified, albeit deeply cynical, theory of Western societal collapse.
And I think it's vital to establish right at the outset how we are approaching this.
Yes, absolutely crucial.
Because, to be clear for you listening, the text contains explosive political accusations and unapologetically dark views on global history and modern capitalism.
No, very dark.
So our role here is strictly analytical. We are examining the mechanics of the author's worldview, how they use specific cultural touchstones to build their argument.
Right. We are looking at the architecture of the anger, not validating the anger itself.
Exactly. We're not endorsing the fatalism or the specific political indictments they present. We're impartially unpacking it.
Impartiality is key here.
So, with that framework in mind, let's look at that architecture. And it starts with the sudden, violent plunge into what the author views as our current reality.
The opening is just brutal.
It really is. The broadcast opens with this sentence: complete relativistic chaos scammers, fomenting jackals and hyena, short-welling fresh prey dripping blanched bones.
Wow.
Yeah, and then it continues, shimmels of flies scoop up meat. This is the West, and the only law here is the law of the jungle.
Just visceral.
The sheer visceral impact of those words immediately sets a tone. I mean, we are not dealing with a polite political essay here.
Not at all.
We are thrown straight into a predatory wasteland. But the truly astonishing part of this opening, and this is what fundamentally shifts how we have to read the entire broadcast, is that the most gruesome imagery in those lines isn't original to the author.
No, it's not. And recognizing the origin of those phrases is the absolute key to unlocking the entire transmission.
Right, because that phrase, short-welling fresh prey dripping blanched bones, and the subsequent line, shimmers of fly scoop up meat, those are direct lyrical pulls.
Almost word for word.
Exactly. They are direct pulls from the 1960s psychedelic rock pioneer Syd Barrett.
Which is such a specific choice.
It is. The first quote, short-welling fresh prey dripping blanched bones, is from Syd Barrett's song Wolfpack.
Right.
And shimmers of fly scoop up meat is from his song Opal.
Yeah, so we have this hyper-modern, aggressive political text that is structurally dependent on the poetry of a 1960s musical icon.
And you have to ask yourself, why? Why anchor a critique of modern capitalism and geopolitical decay to these specific haunting songs?
Well, the text itself frames it. This is a tribute to the sacrificed sonic resonance genius, 60 years later.
A tribute to a sacrificed sonic resonance genius. That phrase is incredible.
It is. And we have to consider what Syd Barrett represents in the broader cultural consciousness, particularly to an author who is analyzing societal breakdown.
Because Barrett wasn't just a musician.
No. He was the primary creative force behind the early Pink Floyd. He was an absolute visionary who essentially mapped the sonic landscape of British psychedelia.
But his tenure was fleeting.
Very fleeting. He suffered a profound mental collapse, which was deeply exacerbated by the immense pressures of the rapidly commercializing music industry and heavy psychedelic drug use.
He became utterly alienated.
Exactly. He fractured under the weight of a machine that demanded constant commodified output. So when the author calls him a sacrificed sonic resonance genius, they are elevating him to this almost martyr-like status.
He is the archetypal casualty of the system.
Right, and the author is using Barrett's tragic trajectory as a macro-level diagnostic tool for modern society today, exactly 60 years later.
I want to push back on that slightly, or at least let's explore the mechanics of that metaphor.
Sure.
Are we saying the author views modern Western society as having suffered a collective psychological break akin to Barrett's? Or is it more about the system that broke him?
I think it's a synthesis of both. Look at the specific songs chosen.
Okay, Wolfpack.
Yeah, Wolfpack is an incredibly paranoid, claustrophobic piece of music. In its original context, it reflects an internal subjective nightmare, the feeling of being hunted.
The walls closed in?
Exactly. The author of our text takes that deeply personal psychological dread and projects it outward onto the macroeconomic landscape.
The internal demons of the late 60s have become the literal external reality of today.
That's the argument. The author pairs Barrett's short-welling, fresh prey, dripping blanched bones with complete relativistic chaos scammers.
Right, the scammer.
The subjective nightmare has materialized as the modern gig economy, the crypto grifts, the attention economy. The author is arguing that we now live inside the psychological breakdown.
The scammers and the opportunists are the new Wolfpack.
Precisely. They are the jackals and hyenas, fomenting in the relativistic chaos.
That recontextualization is brilliant and deeply unsettling, because it strips away the romanticism we usually attach to the 1960s.
Oh, entirely.
We usually view that era through a lens of nostalgia, right? Peace, love, the dawn of a new consciousness.
The summer of love.
Exactly. But Radio-Mannadoro is bypassing the utopian rhetoric entirely and digging straight into the era's casualties.
And then we have the line from Opal.
Shimmers of flies scoop up meat.
Right. The song Opal is stark, it's acoustic, and it's profoundly isolated. That line is a portrait of end-stage decay.
The meat is already dead.
The ecosystem of scavengers has arrived. And the aestheticization of that decay is crucial here.
How do you mean?
Well, the text says it shimmers as the flies scoop up the meat. There is a perverse beauty, or at least a captivating spectacle, to the rotting process. And this ties directly into the author's concept of relativistic chaos.
Because in a landscape devoid of objective truth, which is what relativistic chaos implies, the decay itself becomes a spectacle to be consumed.
Exactly. The hyenas, the jackals, the flies, these are not active predators taking down strong prey. They are scavengers capitalizing on a corpse.
So the author is asserting that the wealth and activity of the modern West isn't the sign of a thriving civilization.
No, it's the frenzied activity of scavengers feeding on the carrion of a dead empire.
Which makes that following sentence land with incredible force. This is the West, and the only law here is the law of the jungle.
It's a complete inversion of the Western narrative.
The narrative of progress, civilization, the rule of law. The author is stripping the veneer off the institutions and saying that beneath the legal codes and the stock markets, it's just blanched bones and flies.
It's pure biological ruthlessness.
And I noticed the capitalization the author employs too. This is the West, with a capital I on is.
Yes, the erratic capitalization throughout this broadcast is fascinating. Whether it's the haste of a pirate transmission or a deliberate stylistic choice, it adds to the feeling of fragmentation.
It visually represents the breakdown the text is describing.
It definitely contributes to the feeling that we are reading something smuggled out of a war zone.
But just as we settle into this grim biological poetry of jackals and blanched bones, the author executes this whiplash-inducing thematic pivot.
The pivot is jarring.
It really is. The text violently snaps from 1960s psychedelic decay directly into the hyper-curated vernacular of the 2020s internet.
Right.
It reads, "Okay, money honey influencers, too late to sing the Bob Dylan blues, hypocrites."
It's quite the tonal shift.
Why drop money honey influencers into the middle of a scavenging wasteland?
Because for the author, the influencers are the apex scavengers. They are the ultimate beneficiaries of the relativistic chaos. The contrast is the point.
So they are violently forcing the highly artificial, heavily filtered world of the internet influencer up against the brutal reality of the jungle.
Exactly. To the author, the money honey influencers are not separate from the hyenas and the flies. They are simply the most heavily camouflaged version of them.
They operate within the exact same extractive ecosystem.
But they mask it behind ring lights, aesthetic lifestyles, and aspirational content.
They are monetizing the shimmer of the flies.
That is an incredibly sharp way to synthesize it. They are monetizing the spectacle of the decay.
And the phrase money honey just drips with derision.
It's mocking a culture that turns every aspect of human existence into a transactional broadcast.
Every morning routine, every meal, every emotional crisis.
Right, but the author's true anger isn't just directed at the hustle itself. It is directed at the moral posturing that often accompanies it.
Which brings us to the next lyrical reference. Too late to sing the Bob Dylan blues, hypocrites.
Yes, the Bob Dylan blues.
This keeps the 60s connective tissue intact, because for you listening who might not know the deep cuts, the Bob Dylan blues is another Syd Barrett song.
It is.
It's a very early track, and it's essentially a playful, somewhat satirical homage to Dylan and the acoustic folk protest movement.
So by invoking it here, the author is creating a very specific critique of modern performative activism.
It's a devastating critique of how modern society attempts to launder its complicity.
Think about what Bob Dylan represented in the early to mid-60s. He was the archetype of the earnest acoustic protest singer.
Right. The idea was that art, awareness, and moral persuasion could halt the war machine and change society.
Singing the Bob Dylan blues represents the belief that you can reform the system by politely pointing out its flaws.
And Radio-Mannadoro is stating unequivocally that this approach is obsolete. It is too late.
I look at the online landscape today and I see exactly what the author is attacking.
Oh, absolutely.
You have these massive influencer accounts whose material wealth is generated entirely by the hyper-capitalist algorithmic engine.
They push endless consumption, fast fashion, unregulated supplements.
The very engine of the law of the jungle. But when a tragedy occurs or a social movement trends, they post a highly stylized, aesthetically pleasing infographic to signal their virtue.
They are singing the Bob Dylan blues while actively feeding on the blanched bones.
The author views this as the ultimate hypocrisy. You cannot claim the moral high ground of the folk protest movement while simultaneously acting as the primary node for relativistic chaos scammers.
The acoustic guitar is useless in a jungle of scavengers.
The author is essentially demanding that society stop pretending. If the law is the law of the jungle, own it.
Right. Do not try to soothe your conscience with performative digital empathy, while your material existence relies on the relentless extraction of the ecosystem.
It's a total rejection of the modern aesthetic of caring.
And it raises a fascinating question about the utility of art in a decaying system.
How so?
Well, if Syd Barrett's poetry is used to describe the horror, and Bob Dylan's legacy is dismissed as insufficient and hypocritical, what kind of expression does the author actually value?
That's a great point.
It seems the only valid expression left, in their eyes, is the pirate broadcast itself, the raw, unvarnished warning.
Which naturally escalates the text from a sociological critique into a deeply theological one.
Because the author has established that the current socioeconomic model is a rotting jungle, and that the cultural figures who try to put a pleasant face on it are hypocrites.
So what is the macro-level consequence of this rot?
The text provides the answer. Shiva is dancing on you and your bloody money. Consume and be consumed.
We have jumped from 1960s London to modern social media, and now we are standing in the middle of ancient Hindu cosmology.
I find the invocation of Shiva here completely fascinating, especially the imagery of the dance.
In the Western popular consciousness, Shiva is often just vaguely recognized as a destroyer god.
Right, which usually carries a purely malicious connotation in Western media.
But the author is tapping into something much more profound here. They are tapping into the core mechanics of cyclical time.
Right, the Hindu cycle of ages.
In the Hindu Trimurti, Shiva's role as the destroyer is not an act of evil. It is a profound cosmic necessity.
The specific imagery of Shiva dancing references the Nataraja, the Lord of the Dance.
Yes, he performs the Tandava, the cosmic dance of death and dissolution.
He dances within a ring of fire.
Exactly, which represents the cosmos. He dances to destroy the weary, corrupted, illusion-bound universe so that it can be cleared away, making room for a new cycle of creation.
So the destruction isn't a punishment, it's a reset mechanism.
Precisely. By placing Western capitalism, the bloody money, under the feet of the dancing Shiva, the author is elevating their critique to an eschatological level.
They are not merely saying that the influencer economy is annoying or that modern capitalism is flawed.
No, they are asserting that the entire paradigm has reached its terminal endpoint.
The corruption, the relativistic chaos, the scavenging, these are all symptoms of an age that has exhausted its spiritual and material viability.
The illusion of progress has failed. The dance has begun.
And this directly connects to the overarching concept of the Kali Yuga.
Yes.
Which we know is central to this text conceptual framework, even if the specific words Kali Yuga aren't explicitly typed out in this exact sentence, the entire broadcast embodies it.
To fully grasp the author's sense of absolute inevitability, we have to look at the characteristics of the Kali Yuga.
It is the final, darkest epoch in the Hindu cycle of time.
It is the age of strife, discord, and spiritual collapse. In the texts describing the Kali Yuga, society is characterized by the exact symptoms the author has outlined.
Rulers become extractors rather than protectors.
Truth becomes entirely subjective, hence relativistic chaos.
Wealth and material consumption become the sole metrics of human value.
Hypocrisy becomes the dominant mode of social interaction.
So the author is looking at the hyper-commodified West and diagnosing it as the absolute nadir of the Kali Yuga.
The system cannot be reformed with a protest song because the cosmic season itself is defined by decay.
The phrase consume and be consumed captures the mechanics of that decay perfectly.
It does.
It immediately brings to mind the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail.
We started with the biological predators, the jackals and the flies. But consume and be consumed feels different.
It feels like an economic inevitability.
Right. If the bloody money requires constant consumption to function, what happens when it runs out of external frontiers?
The system turns inward.
An economic model predicated entirely on infinite growth and relentless extraction cannot exist indefinitely in a finite reality.
The author views the Western capitalist machine as a self-devouring engine.
The influencers, the scammers, the scavengers, they are all consuming the available resources, the attention spans, the capital.
But when the external prey is exhausted, the logic of the jungle does not stop.
The consumers become the consumed. The system cannibalizes its own foundation.
It's the ultimate consequence of the law of the jungle when applied to a closed loop.
The flies eat the meat, but eventually there is no meat left and the flies starve. The decay consumes itself.
And that brings us to the most politically volatile and historically aggressive part of the broadcast.
Yes, the historical ledger.
The author doesn't just state that the West is consuming itself. They present a very specific historical ledger to explain why the money is bloody and how the West built the machine in the first place.
We arrive at the core geopolitical thesis of the transmission.
The text states, "You have parasited the so-called third word for centuries, and this what just the tip of the iceberg you deserve up your ass."
The language here shifts from poetic observation to a direct prosecuting accusation.
And again, just as a reminder for you listening, we are dissecting the historical framework the author is deploying here, regardless of our own historical interpretations.
We're remaining strictly impartial. The author is articulating a ruthless, anti-colonial argument of historical karma.
But what strikes me immediately is the linguistic continuity. They don't use political terminology.
Right.
They don't say colonized or conquered or exploited. They use the word parasited.
They turn a historical era into a biological infection.
That specific verb choice is the linchpin that connects the historical critique back to the biological imagery of the opening lines.
By using parasited, the author strips away the entire lexicon of the imperial project.
There is no room for debates about infrastructure, modernization, or civilizing missions in this text.
They reduce centuries of global history to the crude biological reality of a tapeworm feeding off a host.
The so-called third word and the capitalization of word there is fascinating.
It is. It perhaps suggests the very concept of a third world is merely a linguistic construct used to justify the parasitism.
Exactly. It's framed as the host body that sustained the West.
It reinforces the law of the jungle concept. If the West operated as a parasite globally for centuries, extracting wealth and resources to build its own gleaming cities, the bloody money,
then it cannot suddenly claim to operate on higher moral principles now.
the foundation is biologically extractive.
But the really terrifying part of this sentence is the concept of consequence. This was just the tip of the iceberg you deserve.
The author is looking at the current societal fragmentation.
The mental health crises echoing Sid Barrett, the predatory scammers, the self-consuming economy.
And framing it all as a cosmic bill coming due.
It is a doctrine of inescapable geopolitical blowback.
The author is suggesting that the internal decay of the West is not a random misfortune or a failure of current policy. It is the structural consequence of its historical parasitism.
You cannot build a civilization on the extraction of others and expect the architecture to remain sound.
The rot is baked into the foundation. When Shiva dances on the bloody money, He is dancing on centuries of stolen equity.
The current chaos is merely the universe balancing the ledger.
And the phrase tip of the iceberg implies that the historical debt is so vast that the current collapse is only the very beginning of the reckoning.
It is a punishingly deterministic view of history. It leaves no room for redemption or reform within the current paradigm.
If the very DNA of the civilization is parasitic, then the host's eventual collapse is the only cure.
The author is forcing the listener, the influencers, and the hypocrites to look at the decay around them and accept it as a deserved punishment rather than a solvable problem.
It completely annihilates the optimism of the Bob Dylan blues.
Which is why the broadcast moves rapidly toward an apocalyptic conclusion.
Right. If the system is a parasitic, self-consuming fire built on historical extraction.
And if it is currently in the terminal phase of the Kali Yuga.
What is the ultimate endpoint?
The author abandons the biological and the mythological and shifts abruptly into the cold, inorganic lexicon of science fiction and nuclear brinkmanship.
The climax of the text reads, "You are all complicit of your self-consuming fire. Nukes are ready, so stop the signal, Borgs." Radio-Mannadoro.
The shift here is just jarring. We go from the organic rot of flies and meat to the ultimate sterility of nukes and Borgs.
As someone who deeply understands sci-fi, how do you read that?
I find the weaponization of the Borg metaphor here incredibly revealing about how the author views the general populace.
Let's examine that metaphor closely because it synthesizes the entire critique of modern culture.
For those who might not know the Star Trek mythos, the Borg are the antithesis of individuality and organic life.
They are a cybernetic hive mind.
They do not possess distinct personalities, cultures, or desires. Their sole imperative is to encounter diverse organic life forms, forcibly implant them with cybernetic technology, and assimilate them into the collective.
All to serve the relentless expansion of the hive. They are the ultimate consumers.
Resistance is futile. That's their defining ethos. It's not a negotiation. It's a biological and technological inevitability.
So when the author calls the audience the West, the influencers, the consumers, Borgs, they're delivering the final, most devastating insult.
They're saying that despite all the curated individuality of the internet, despite the personal branding of the money honey era, there is no actual individuality left.
The populace has been entirely assimilated by the capitalist machine.
The biological scavengers from the beginning of the text, the jackals and hyenas, were still driven by instinct.
They were still part of a natural, albeit brutal, order.
But by the end of the broadcast, the author diagnoses the society as having transitioned into something worse. A mechanized, unthinking swarm.
The influencers are just nodes in the network, optimizing their output for the algorithm, feeding the self-consuming fire.
They are complicit because they are integrated into the circuitry of the parasite.
And what keeps the Borg unified?
In the lore, it's the subspace signal.
The constant droning broadcast of the collective consciousness that suppresses the individual will.
When the author commands, "Stop the signal," they are identifying the lifeblood of the modern hive mind.
The signal is the relentless algorithm.
It's the 24/7 news cycle of relativistic chaos.
It's the constant pressure to monetize, to consume, to perform the Bob Dylan blues for engagement metrics.
The signal is the mechanism that maintains the illusion of the Kali Yuga.
It is the operational frequency of the bloody money.
The author's demand to stop the signal is a demand for a total cessation of the dominant cultural and economic broadcast.
It is not a call for reform. You cannot reform the Borg.
You can only sever their connection to the collective.
The author is demanding a radical, immediate unplugging from the societal mainframe.
But the demand carries the ultimate existential threat. Nukes are ready.
The text implies that if the signal is not stopped, if the Borg do not awaken and dismantle the collective, the self-consuming fire will reach its logical, physical conclusion.
The internal decay will manifest as external atomic annihilation.
Shiva's cosmic dance of destruction will take the form of nuclear fire.
It is a bleak, uncompromising ultimatum.
And it brings us to the final assertion of the pirate radio persona, Radio-Mannadoro.
That sign-off contextualizes everything we just read.
The author is adopting the role of a rogue operator who has briefly managed to hack into the Borg's frequency.
They have hijacked the signal just long enough to scream this warning into the void before the collective reasserts control.
It is an act of guerrilla media warfare. The brevity of the text isn't a lack of material. It is a simulation of urgency.
They only had a few seconds of airtime to deliver the diagnosis. You are a parasite, the decay is setting in, you have become a machine, and the fire is coming.
It is an astonishing piece of compression.
We have spent an hour unpacking a paragraph, and it feels like we could spend 10 more.
Easily.
It's a text that forces us to look at the jagged edges of our culture. It takes the tragic, psychedelic breakdown of Syd Barrett and uses it as a mirror for our own digital breakdown.
It takes the earnestness of the 60s folk movement and exposes its inadequacy in the face of modern algorithmic capitalism.
It places our daily scroll of influencers and aesthetics against the vast, unforgiving backdrop of the Kali Yuga and the historical ledger of colonialism.
And it leaves us staring down the barrel of a cybernetic apocalypse.
And that brings us to the ultimate purpose of analyzing a text like this.
As we said at the beginning, the value does not lie in adopting the author's furious fatalism.
The value lies in the friction the text generates.
A transmission, like Radio-Mannadoro's, is designed to be abrasive. It's designed to disrupt the smooth, frictionless surface of our daily media consumption.
It forces a critical confrontation.
When we look at the money-honey influencers, do we see harmless entertainment, or do we see the apex scavengers of a decaying ecosystem?
When we engage in digital activism, are we actually affecting change, or are we just singing a hollow song to soothe ourselves while remaining plugged into the Borg?
It challenges us to verify our own humanity within this system.
Are we individuals, or are we just conduits for the signal? And that is the thought I want to leave you with today.
It's a heavy one.
The author, whoever is behind Radio-Mannadoro, aggressively demands that we stop the signal. They demand that we cut the power to the hive mind, pull the plug on the relativistic chaos, and halt the self-consuming fire.
But their broadcast cuts out right at the edge of the apocalypse.
They tell us how to end the nightmare, but they never tell us what the morning looks like.
No, they don't.
So I ask you if we actually found the courage or the desperation to reach up and sever the connection. If we truly stop the signal of the modern world, what do you think the new broadcast should sound like?
That's the real question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.